I'm still willing to give Marques Hagans more time because not all of the issues with the wide receivers are his fault.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show, and I'm going to explain why I don't think Marques Hagans should be fired. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and you will get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Be a part of the conversation down in the comments section. I know a good amount of people are going to disagree with me here. I don't think Marques Hagans should be fired. I think all of the circumstances here are making this an uphill battle for Hagans. He inherited a bad setup at Penn State. People look at Hagans because he is in charge now, but Taylor Stubblefield was not doing well. Long term, there was a reason he was fired abruptly by James Franklin and Penn State. He was not recruiting well. He was not doing well in the transfer portal when that had first started. And Penn State made a change, and now Hagans is expected to clean up all of this in a year, 2 years' time. I know that the 2023 and 2024 results have not been the best, but I think despite the circumstances, the reason Hagans is still employed, I'm going off of what Penn State is doing here mostly, for the most part. If Hagans was as bad as people say that he is, that it's easy to point to the wide receivers didn't get a catch in the Orange Bowl. It's easy to point that stuff out, but how did we get to this point? And I think that Hagans inheriting this setup is not his doing, and that's what I mean when I say that it's not his fault. Penn State's also viewed with this negative stigma now. This goes beyond 23 and 2024. When people think of where should wide receivers go to develop, they're going to think of Ohio State. They're going to think of LSU. Do you notice how Penn State is often mentioned for running backs and now tight ends? Eventually, offensive line is going to get there. Bill Troutwine has done that incredible of a job. So now Hagans has to rewrite that stigma, rewrite that narrative that Penn State can be a place where wide receivers succeed. And I know that 23 and 24 go against that. But that's why LSU and Ohio State have an easier time, because you look at Garrett Wilson and now Jeremiah Smith in the present. At LSU, it's Jamar Chase and then Malik Neighbors. Penn State doesn't have that. But Penn State has Saquon Barkley. Penn State now has Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson, and especially Tyler Warren. That's also part of it too, is that Penn State's offense, Penn State's scheme is not built. It is not tailored to wide receivers. So why don't wide receivers do well? Marques Hagans is not calling the plays. Marques Hagans is not designing the offense. The offense is presently designed to be a balanced attack in the ground game. Primarily, I wouldn't even call it a balanced attack, really. It is predominantly in the ground game. But it's balanced in the sense of you're going to rely on more than just your wide receivers to catch passes. You are going to rely on Singleton, Allen, Drew Aller to get you yards, both through the air and on the ground. You had Bo Pribula in this past offense as well, because we're looking at Andy Kotelnicki. Mike Yurcich is one thing, but Andy Kotelnicki is going to be back for the 2025 season, so you have to talk about that. The offense does not run through the wide receivers. It goes through the tight end in Tyler Warren, but it's going to go through Khalil Dinkins and Luke Reynolds and eventually Andrew Rapplier when he comes back. It's going to run through primarily Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. It's going to go, the 2024 offense, especially the passing attack, ran through Tyler Warren. But that's my point, is that Hagans can only do so much. He was left an awful situation. There was limited depth. He had to go into the transfer portal when he had not established any relationships. He did not establish any sort of ground or foundation in 2023. Then you have the bad results. So it's this negative domino effect where Keandre Lambert-Smith and Dante Cephas did not work out. They went into the portal, and now you have Trey Wallace and Amari Evans. And I'm going to talk about that because did the wide receiver room even improve in 2024? We'll talk about that in the upcoming segment. But not everything is Marques Hagans' fault. between the negative stigma and the way that the scheme is set up. So wide receivers, these superstar wide receivers are not going to naturally want to be at Penn State. You're going to need guys currently like a Tyser Denmark, this class of 2025. That is why Hagans is still here, despite all of the circumstances, because why would any wide receiver want to go to Penn State? Think about that for a moment. Wide receivers are bad. Look at 23, look at 24. Marques Hagans is a terrible position coach, yet he got 3 solid wide receiver commits in the class of 2024. And we know for the most part, Tyser Denmark is at least on the right track. Peter Gonzalez and Josiah Brown are dealing with respective injuries and are on different timelines to return. So I'm not going to put as much responsibility and as many expectations on them. But Tyser Denmark, from what we've seen and what we know, is at least trending in the right direction. But wide receivers are so bad at Penn State. Why go there? Then how does Hagans get 4 solid commits in the class of 2025? Between Matthew Outen, Lyric Samuel, Jeff Exner, and Kobe Howard, these are all solid 4-star receivers with the potential to be even better than that, to outplay the recruiting ranking. So if wide receiver is in the wide receiver room's in such a bad spot, then how is Marques Hagans able to recruit as well as he did? But it's an uphill battle for him. He doesn't have the Saquon Barkley and the Tyler Warren to go off of him in his recruiting battle. He has to establish his own foundation. Taylor Stubblefield didn't leave it in a positive setup. And the scheme is just not tailored to wide receivers at the moment because you have players like Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen and Tyler Warren. Those are your superstars. You don't force feed the football to the wide receivers just because they're wide receivers. You're going to give the football to your best players. So 2025 is even going to be interesting in the sense of how much is going to change. The results look bad here, but they're explainable. And in the middle of this defensive coordinator search, I emphasize consistency and continuity, and everybody else wants that. Does Penn State really want this revolving door at the wide receiver room as well? When they're dealing with it at the defensive coordinator spot, now you have to go find another position coach. It is not all Hagans' fault. Certainly, you want to see more production out of the group, but it's hard to say that when you got production from them, just not in the biggest moments. The biggest criticism that I can make of the wide receivers is that they didn't win in the biggest games. They were winning all the other times, but when it came to Ohio State and Michigan in 23, Ohio State and Notre Dame in 2024, 25 for the playoffs, they did not perform. And that's why Penn State is having a reset, because what Penn State needed them to be, they weren't there. Marques Hagans isn't running the routes for these wide receivers. Of course, yes, he is responsible for the coaching and development, but at the end of the day, you got to be able to win in one-on-one coverage and man-to-man coverage to give them something. At some point in time, the player has to be able to step up. The coach cannot go execute for them on the football field. So I'm willing to give Hagans more time because he inherited a bad setup. There actually has been some positive developments, and the wide receiver room, he is recruiting well despite the circumstances. So those are my 3 reasons. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. So we'll talk about this more, because the argument is being made that there was actually a regression in the wide receiver room from 23 to 24. And I disagree. I'll tell you more about it on the other side of this break. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and you will get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and there's a variety of bets that keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you'll get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. And if you look over at FanDuel.com right now, or go to the FanDuel Sportsbook app, you can see the lines for the conference championship games in the NFL. Philadelphia Eagles are a 5.5-point favorite versus the Washington Commanders. The total is set at 47.5. The Chiefs are a 1.5-point favorite against the Buffalo Bills. The total is set at 48.5. If you like those lines, just go over to FanDuel.com today and get started with $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. When comparing the 2024 room versus the 2023 room, it is incorrect to say that there was a regression. The wide receivers did, in fact, get better. I don't know about substantially, but there certainly was progress made. Trey Wallace did overall better as a wide receiver, as a number one wide receiver in this offense compared to Keandre Lambert-Smith. A lot of this discourse is centered around, and I know it does not look good. I know it looks terrible, not having a catch in the Orange Bowl in the biggest game of the season when it matters most. You got to remember that Notre Dame's secondary is one of the best in the country. Notre Dame's defensive backs were just better than Penn State's wide receivers. But against everybody else, aside from Ohio State and Notre Dame, Penn State's wide receivers did their part, did their job, and in more than just the passing game. Blocking matters. Being able to take your defender out of a play, and why Singleton and Allen were able to return to somewhat of their prime form was because of that addition of Julian Fleming and the standard that he set as, we're more than just pass catchers. We got to be able to block in this scheme. So the wide receivers actually did take a step forward. Trey Wallace was better as a blocker. Julian Fleming certainly helped, right? They gave them, and you have to remember that Tyler Warren was a pass catcher too. He was the featured receiver in this offense. So despite pretty much 80-90% of the workload going to Tyler Warren, Trey Wallace statistically was better than Keandre Lambert-Smith in 2023. 46 receptions, 720 yards, and 4 touchdowns. But comparatively, I mean, Tyler Warren had double the production with 104 catches and 1,200 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. These guys, it's not like they were complete afterthoughts. Wallace and Evans just didn't show up in the biggest moments of the season. And that's kind of the case in 2023 too. But I don't know, if I think about that USC game where Julian Fleming stepped up in the biggest moment to keep that drive alive so that Penn State could go and tie it and then ultimately win the game. I don't know if the 2023 group is able to do that. Having Andy Kotelnicki versus a Mike Yurcich certainly helps, but to say that the wide receivers actually regressed, it's simply because of recency bias. We're literally going off of just the Notre Dame game in this case. The wide receivers overall certainly were better, just did not show up in the biggest moments. And remember what they're competing against. They're competing against Tyler Warren for usage in the offense. They're also competing against 2 dynamic NFL caliber running backs in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, who not only run the football, but can catch the football as well. They had 600 carries collectively, and that's between Drew Aller and Bo Pribula as well. The wide receivers were just not featured in the offense, but when they were, gave you something more than they did in 2023, because it was a struggle in some of those other games throughout the season where the wide receivers were better than the competition, and they still didn't do well in 2023. But in 2024, there really wasn't. Penn State was still able to get the job done in games that I don't think they would have in 23. Maybe that's Andy Kotelnicki. Maybe that's the emergence of Tyler Warren. But to say that the wide receivers were worse, and do you notice? Okay, let's talk about Keandre Lambert-Smith. Dante Cephas didn't do well after leaving Penn State. Neither did Malik Mega. So the exodus from 2023, let's put Keandre Lambert-Smith in the spotlight here. KLS did fine at Auburn. I am not saying that 900 yards and 50 receptions and 8 touchdowns isn't good. But you have to also look at the body of work. He was one of the main options in the offense. Auburn also didn't run the ball as many times as well. So he's going to get the volume in that offense. You have to look at it that way, is that the wide receivers are not featured in this group, in this setup. So I look at Keandre Lambert-Smith's production. Oh, well, he did this against Georgia. He did this against Alabama. In losing games, they were from behind. They were playing catch up. In the games that were close, that mattered most, KLS disappeared in certain moments, kind of like the big games against Michigan. It worked out for him, though. He was a priority in the offense, and he responded well. And it sounds like, from all accounts, that it was a good move for both Penn State and KLS. But to say that he became the superstar wide receiver, he had 50 catches. Trey Wallace had 46. And KLS was a featured component of that Auburn offense. And that was a team that was constantly playing from behind. So naturally, he was going to get the volume. I don't care what he did against Alabama A&M. I don't care what he did against Alabama in garbage time, but it worked out for him in somewhat of a sense. And I think Trey Wallace is going to do better at Ole Miss as well. And people are going to point to that and say, see, Trey Wallace had 800, 900 yards as a number 2 or as a number 3 option in an offense that is a predominantly passing attack. Penn State is predominantly a run-first team that focuses on tight ends, that focuses on balance. It's not, let's get to the football, to the wide receivers as quickly as possible. It makes sense for Trey Wallace to move on and go to a system that's going to help him more in this case. But the wide receiver room overall did not take a step back in 2024. They did better when it came to some of those games, which were really close. They did step up in a lot of ways, but certainly did not regress. But everyone wants to know about the future. 2025, Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, is that going to be enough to get this team where it needs to be in the postseason? And I keep saying Penn State doesn't need an elite wide receiver to make this offense go. But let's talk about it on the other side of this break. And this message is brought to you by Prizepicks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prizepicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prizepicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all of the football action. And now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action with Prizepicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple selections. And when you look at the postseason, you can select players like Josh Allen. Will he have more or less than his passing yards? Or in Travis Kelce, do you like his more or less on his receiving yards? It is fun to predict and easy to play. Plus, with the Prizepicks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks does not hit. And with the app, you can get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Get ready to run your game this football postseason. Download the Prizepicks app today and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prizepicks. Again, that is Prizepicks. Run your game. And let's finish up the show by talking about where the wide receiver room stands in 2025, and they will continue to get better. I like the addition of Kyron Hudson. I like the addition of Devontae Ross. They are expected to be better versions of Trey Wallace and Amari Evans, but they're slightly different. So Kyron Hudson, I think, is going to give you better blocking ability. And I compare him to Julian Fleming in a sense too, just because he is a bulkier wide receiver. And he is going to be, I think, as a blocker, is going to be better and useful in this Andy Kotelnicki offense. Devontae Ross is honestly might be faster than Amari Evans, but he is also a slot receiver. Amari Evans was a boundary outside receiver. Devontae Ross is going to be on the slot. In the slot, that speed is going to be extremely helpful for Penn State's offense. They're going to get more receivers. There is a spring transfer portal window. Penn State is probably going to at least add 1. Maybe they even add 2 more wide receivers in that next transfer portal window. So I think the wide receivers have nowhere to go but up, simply because of this perception. It does not look good. It has not been the best, and they've been the reason why Penn State has been out in some of these big games. And they have been the reason why Penn State has not done well, whether it's Michigan or Ohio State in 23, Notre Dame and Ohio State in 2024. The wide receivers bear a significant amount of responsibility in those games that they lost. But I like the additions of Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross because they're going to help balance what Penn State wants to do offensively. The wide receivers do not need to be this superstar group. They're going to lean on and rely on Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, Drew Aller, and the tight ends, Khalil Dinkins and Luke Reynolds. Honestly, I've said this already. It seemed like a crazy idea at first, Penn State running a wishbone offense primarily. But now that I think about it, it honestly plays into their strengths. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton on the football field, you can throw to the running backs. The wide receivers, look at Kyron Hudson. He didn't even get to 1,000 yards, or neither did Devontae Ross. If that happens, it's because they're sharing a workload with two NFL caliber running backs who honestly should have went to the pros. They should not be back for their senior season, yet they are. Luke Reynolds is another up and coming tight end. Khalil Dinkins is waiting to get his opportunity as well. There's a reason he's been utilized pretty significantly for a role player type of tight end in this Penn State teams over the past few seasons, because he is a capable receiver. Andy Kotelnicki is going to spread the football out and create confusion, deception. So the wide receivers need to be more than just guys that go and get as many air yards as possible. I think this group is set up well for success because there's not going to be all this pressure on them. There's no, like I said, there's nowhere to go but up for them. You have Singleton, you have Allen, you have one of the best offensive lines returning together in the Big Ten Conference. We'll see across the country. I can't speak for every program, but solidly in the Big Ten, Penn State's offensive line is going to be a really good group. Drew Aller comes back for another season. Hudson was also buried in that USC offense. There were so many different wide receivers. Hudson has incredible catching ability. He can catch anything that you throw to him. Devontae Ross is as fast as it gets, is as fast as he can be. And this group is going to complement, these wide receivers right now are going to complement what Penn State wants to do. So it is going to be more of the same. It's going to be more of the same in the sense because they don't need them to be these game changer superstar wide receivers. So I want people to understand that I want people to understand me when I'm saying that, is that they are not going to be asked to take over games. They're going to be continued to ask to play complementary roles, but hopefully when they are needed, when they are asked, hey, Singleton and Allen aren't having their best game, they're able to step up in those bigger moments. I think Kyron Hudson can do that. I think Ross being a speed threat, going deep down the field is going to create, it's going to create those opportunities for Singleton and Allen in between the tackles inside of the box. It's going to cause the defense to give respect to the other elements of this Penn State offense in 2025. So the wide receivers, it's not going to look pretty in the box scores every single time, but they're going to do things in blocking, in scheme that Penn State needs them to be to maximize Drew Aller and Singleton and Allen and the ground game. They're going to be committed. When you have two NFL caliber running backs, you're going to be committed to the ground game. This team is, I fully expect them to have a similar type of setup where they run the ball 600 plus times in the season because you have those running backs. You can trust Corey Smith now. You can trust Quentin Martin. You can also use them as pass catchers. It doesn't need to be just Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. Are they showing up? You have Luke Reynolds. You have Khalil Dinkins. It's not just going to be on the wide receivers. So they are going to get better. You have Tysier Denmark, who is developing nicely. Caden Saunders is going to get healthier. Liam Clifford, I think at least gives you another veteran in the wide receiver room, even though he didn't really do a lot in 2024. This group is set up well, but don't put these lofty expectations on them that, they're going to have multiple 1,000-yard receivers, because that's not going to be the case. The volume is going to run through the running backs and the tight ends, and the wide receivers will do well with what they're going to be asked to do in 2025. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. I am not here to sell out on the wide receiver situation. It is an uphill battle, and I think Marques Hagans is doing, again, he had to go recruit Kyron Hudson. He had to go recruit Devontae Ross, despite those circumstances of the bad results, and get 4 commits in the class of 2025 as well. But of course, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have I changed your mind about where the wide receivers stand? If you're new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we're talking Penn State football, Penn State wrestling, and men's basketball. It's not just football central here on this show. All of the conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams here on Locked On Nittany Lions.